Greetings and welcome once again to Aspects of Aliyah and our new series of news and views from the heart of Israel. Had some interesting comments from our last broadcast about the problems of the so-called two-state solution and various incidents that are happening around this. This last week has seen a lot of interest, a lot of friction, a lot of hot air, and an amount of unbelievable lack of understanding of reality. In the last few weeks, the UK, France, Canada, Australia in particular, hotly pursued by Spain, Italy and Greece, have been militating louder than ever for the recognition of a Palestinian state next month at the annual meeting of the United Nations General Assembly. That is on top of a remarkable 147 United Nations member states that already recognised the so-called state of Palestine. None of these 142 countries, plus the UK, Canada, Australia, Spain, Italy, Greece, and so on, seem to think that there's nothing at all wrong with rewarding Palestinians with statehood after Hamas-led terrorist attacks on the southern Israel communities on October the 7th, 2023. In fact, that despicable orgy of mass murder, of rape, of torture, kidnapping, with which we include taking hostages and their ill treatment, and wanton destruction, mass rape, as we said, beheadings, burning of babies, all these kind of things seem to fulfill the hopes of the mass terrorists by leading to a revival of interest in a scheme for Palestinian statehood around the globe. The issue had gone somewhat stale, I think, for quite a while, due to lack of negotiations in order to create one. However, it's probably fair to say that this new spate of terrorism suddenly reignited the issue. I think it needs to be said, though, quite clearly, that nobody really seems to know what a Palestinian state is. And certainly, the unbelievable lack of cognizance of what a two-state solution means is an underlying tension concerning the whole matter. In an interview about 10 days ago, shall we say middle August, Benjamin Netanyahu gave a very, very interesting interview with a group called Trigonometry. And in this interview, he said, the point is that nobody wants a two-state solution, and particularly the Palestinians don't want a two-state solution. They want the annihilation of Israel and a one-state solution for themselves, obviously run by Hamas and Iran and its surrogates, shall we say, or its clients. It's very interesting that Mr. Netanyahu should make that comment because, as we said in our previous broadcast, what actually would a Palestinian state actually be? Nobody recognises any borders whatsoever. Hamas is a proscribed terrorist organisation. You can't give statehood to a terrorist prescribed organisation, and so on. So we've got this rather awful situation where the above countries are militating for a two-state solution. David Lammy, who is our unfortunately appointed Home Secretary, summoned the Israeli ambassador to meet him to condemn Israel's actions in Gaza and to repeat this demand. Notice the word demand for a two-state solution. The Israeli ambassador said very simply, we do not tell the UK how to run their country and to give pieces of its land away, and we do not expect you to do the same. In other words, mind your own business. We don't tell you what to do, you don't tell us what to do. Very brusque and very to the point. However, how is this motion, this new movement, to put October the 7th into the dustbin of history and revive a cause that had lost its impetus 2 years previously? So, outside the countries that we've mentioned, which of course are Europe, a lot of Americans seem to agree with this idea. According to a Reuters Ipsos poll published this week, or now we listened to it, it'll be last week, of course, which we're looking at the week of 19th of August forward. This poll, 58% of adult Americans favoured recognition of a Palestinian state. That figure largely hinges on party affiliations. 78% of Democrats agreed, while only 41% of Republicans favour a movement towards a two-state solution. The question was posed, along with another, whether the State of Israel should be recognised. Really? A state recognised by the United Nations that's already been in existence for 77 years? Well, this rather ridiculous question was posed, and the backing for Israel was higher, though far from unanimous. 18% Democrats and 12% Republicans, and 21% of those who didn't identify opposing the existence of a Jewish state. That was the figures that thought 18% of Democrats, 12% Republicans questioning whether there should be a Jewish state, which just shows really our history has been revised, forgotten. Remember, we've spoken about historical amnesia from previous occasions. Well, while a lot of people seem to think that it's quite reasonable to give the Arabs a state if the Jewish people have got one, this belongs to the world of ideas, not the world of history or the world of right thinking. It would seem that this state of support for Palestine, let's call it that, would be so popular at the General Assembly as if it's a given. But you see, as I said earlier, it's a false dichotomy. The Palestinian Arab population does not want statehood as long as it requires them to live in peace alongside Israel. That's been made abundantly clear for well over 100 years, as they've rejected, note these words I'm using, they have rejected, out of hand almost, numerous offers of statehood dating right back to the 1947 UN partition resolution, which divided up the British mandate, as I'm sure you're aware of. Along with the United States, Israel for the Palestinians, the sovereign state in Gaza, sharing with Jerusalem, almost all of Judea and Samaria, with various swaps. In 2000, 2001, and 2008, as part of negotiations. Each time they said no, walked out. It's same as these negotiations. You cannot deal with terrorists. And Hamas will never agree to a proper ceasefire, or if they do, they break it immediately, and so on. Now, the Palestinian Authority, let's go away from Gaza, that rules most of the Arabs living in Judea and Samaria, actually has observer status at the United Nations that we've spoken about previously. But neither it nor Hamas, that ruled Gaza from 2007 till, shall we say now, qualifies for statehood under the normal rules of international law. Why? Because it does not control a defined territory, and it does not have a functioning government in any meaningful sense of the term. I'd like to just roll a little bit more on this one, because the loudest voices and the loudest militation, shall we say, comes from international lawyers, or human rights lawyers mostly, concerning this matter. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Sir Keir Starmer, is a human rights lawyer with an atrocious record, and the Attorney General of the United Kingdom, Baron Hermer, is also a human rights lawyer. Clients of Hermer include Abu Hamza, yes, Abu Hamza, Jerry Adams, leader of the IRA, and Shamima Begum, who's somewhat of a coastal labourer, as a young woman who left England, joined ISIS, and was stripped of her citizenship because she had dual nationality. She was also a citizen of Bangladesh. So what we've got is we have a tranche of human rights lawyers and left-wing ideologues all demanding something that does not fit within international law, which is our normal complaint about the UK government here, that they live in a world of ideology and not a world of reality. And these nations that are clamouring for a two-state solution are living in a world of ideology and not reality. These pro-Palestinian marches that take place, most of the people on them are ideologues, and the other part are people who are just there because of identity politics or seeking the moral high ground. Let me repeat this. The Palestinian Authority and Hamas do not qualify for statehood under all of the normal rules of international law. And as Benjamin Netanyahu pointed out, neither control a defined territory and neither a functioning government in any meaningful sense of the term. The United Nations Charter also requires it to be peace-loving, which no one in the right mind could consider that the PA or Hamas has shown itself willing to recognise the legitimacy of the Jewish state, no matter where its borders might be drawn. We're going to take a break now, and we're going to look at the nations surrounding Israel.
If you are a Christian, then there is no question that you owe a great debt to the Jewish people. Unto them were entrusted the oracles of God. What does that mean? It means, if not for the faithfulness of the Jewish people, we would not have this. And therefore you would not know your God, and you would not know his Son.
Israel and the Jewish people are under attack right now, and we owe them everything. The least that we can do is support them in their hour of need. So please go to EzraInternational.org and give to the Emergency Relief Fund, and your dollars will be used to help displaced and traumatized Jewish people throughout the land.
And remember, if you do nothing, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jewish people from another place. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Please go to EzraInternational.org and give your best gift today.
Welcome back. So, we've been speaking about advocacy for a Palestinian state, which has been largely the success of the Hamas propaganda about the war that they started, and blaming Israel for the consequences of this. We could speak for much more time on this. We could speak for another hour at least, but we need to move on. So what we're going to look at now is the nations and personages and the enemies surrounding Israel. While Hamas are still fighting a propaganda war very successfully by lying, by creating incidents, by false news, and also by their influence within the UN, by people who work for the UN who are members of Hamas. They're still firing rockets into Israel. Hezbollah in the north have been largely degraded, and there's something of a civil war going on there between the official government troops of the Lebanon and Hezbollah, who are still finding time to fire rockets in, but there are many demands on Israel at the moment to withdraw from Lebanon. But remember this, 5 of the bases that are established in Lebanon are just slightly over the border, are on the higher ground. The Golan being an example, but on the higher ground, because the person on the higher ground has got the advantage of throwing munitions into Israel or wherever. So they're still at it. Iran are rearming. On last night's news, it said that there have been massive orders for rearmaments from Iran to both Turkey and China that are currently being delivered. The word on the street in Israel is that Iran are getting ready for round 2. Let's not forget the Houthis down in Yemen, another proxy of Iran, who this last week fired a large ballistic missile into the south of Israel that fortunately was intercepted. And then we can look at Turkey. Turkey and Iran are getting very, very close together, along with the Muslim Brotherhood in particular. Now, at the moment, there's a rather interesting, I don't know what to call this. There's a conference taking place. It's called the IUNS, which is diagram for an international conference. And this conference has been set up particularly for input from Qatar. Okay? So it's a scholars' conference in Turkey, international, but mostly Turkey and Qatar. Now, as far as Qatar's Muslim scholars are concerned, the war in the Gaza Strip did not start on the day Hamas launched its invasion of Israel. The war began the moment Israel fired back, as Gates Institute points out quite rightly. The real victims of this conflict at the moment are the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, not those who were murdered, raped, beheaded and burned alive, according to Qatar's Muslim scholars. That's interesting, isn't it? Several Arab countries, such as Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, have gone as far as adding Qatar's IUMS to their terrorist blacklists, saying that it used Islamic rhetoric as a cover to facilitate terrorist activities. Needless to say, Hamas have made no moves whatsoever to release the Israeli hostages, and the scholars have not requested that they do so. As has been said for a long, long time, release hostages and the war more or less ends. The suffering of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip is directly a result of Hamas, his war on Israel, and in turn on God himself, on his word, his promises. You cannot separate the three-stranded cord of God, land, and people. But the Islamic Qatar scholars want to wipe the whole thing off the face of the earth. For Muslim scholars, not scholars, scholars, their rhetoric, their movements of boycotting, isolating Israel, is more important than bringing an end to hostilities and suffering in the Gaza Strip. Their interpretation of Sharia law and their disregard of international humanitarian principles suggests that it's in order to sacrifice as many Palestinians as necessary for the sake of murdering as many Jews as possible en route to destruction of Israel. None of us should be surprised by this. Instead of urging Muslims to denounce terrorism and renounce violence, the organisation earlier this year issued a fatwa. A fatwa is an Islamic ruling calling upon all Muslims to wage jihad against Israel. The great promulgation of this comes from the Muslim Brotherhood, and it's important to know that Qatar and Turkey have proven time and time again that they will always promote the Muslim Brotherhood and its affiliates and their program, which essentially is a jihad to destroy Israel. And it's time that the West, instead of calling for two-state solution, started calling on Turkey and Qatar, on Iran and its surrogates to desist and to disregard these calls for a one-state solution. I hope I'm making this point in the same way that I became very discontent using the expression replacement theology, because you can't theology for replacement. I've started to use a term that I'm pleased to say has caught on in the areas that I work in, and we've replaced it with displacement theology. Displacement theology. So, my dear friends, let's stop calling this a two-state solution, because that in itself is misnomer, and it's misleading, it's misguiding, and worst of all, it simply isn't true. The call is for a one-state solution, where the Arabs in Palestine, or should we say those in Gaza and Judea and Samaria, because there is no Palestine as such, This is a call for a one-state solution where that entity annihilates Israel and destroys the Jewish people. So, when the United Kingdom, France, the two main promulgators, let me say, along with the European allies, Italy and Greece, along with Canada, and I'm afraid to say Australia, where anti-Semitism has gone off scale and pro-Palestinian demonstrations have gone off scale. They're not calling for a two-state solution in the real world. They're calling for a two-state solution in the ideal world, where Israel and Palestine live together in perfect harmony. It's been illustrated, surely, that the Muslim Brotherhood, Iran and its proxies have got no interest whatsoever in peace and reconciliation. It's been demonstrated time and time again. They're looking for a one-state solution where Israel is annihilated and destroyed. I really hope that this is putting a better look on it. So, at the moment, 150 prominent Muslim scholars from 50 countries are currently attending the conference I've spoken about in Istanbul to discuss what we were speaking about earlier. Terrible. The conference is taking place at the Ayub Sultan Mosque. As I say, it was organised by IUMS, the International Union of Muslim Scholars, a body of Islamic theologians founded in 2004 by the late Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, an Egyptian scholar and known as the spiritual leader of the Muslim Brotherhood organisation. And Qaradawi was closely associated with Hamas and so on. He spoke very warmly about martyrdom operations or suicide bombings as an indication of Allah's justice. And we could go on and on and on. Sufficient to say, this International Scholars Conference, lionising the Muslim Brotherhood, who caused most of the problems in Egypt, shall we say, and are not proscribed generally, shall we say, together as a coordinating mechanism for theological justification, is really a matter of great concern. So, let me leave you with a few following thoughts. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We're using Jerusalem in the same way we use Washington and London as the nation. Pray for mercy for Israel. Pray for mercy for those who have been used as human shields, those that have been deliberately kept in vile and dire conditions, and pray a spirit of confusion would fall on the organisations that don't just wish but lust to destroy Israel and the Jewish people and the knowledge of the God of Israel. And as ever, God be with you until we meet again.